Welcome to another episode of Product Unfiltered. Today we have Elliott Poppel, the CEO and founder of General Collaboration. Elliott has held key positions at Meta, where he managed product teams and drove innovation. Prior to Meta, he co founded Robin Health, a D2C healthcare platform, and led App.io, a company pioneering streaming mobile apps for the cloud. We're excited to discuss Elliott's entrepreneurial experience and product leadership experience, and also learn into the art of building impactful products. Thank you so much, Elliott, for joining us for today's podcast. We're really excited to have you here.
I'm excited to be here. Thanks so much for having me, guys.
Thank you. And Elliot, like before we jump into your entrepreneurial and product leadership experience, why don't we get some insights about your journey into product management and your current role at General Collaboration? How did it started? We know that you have a cyclical journey from an entrepreneur to a product manager, again to entrepreneurship, but we would love to learn more about the journey in detail.
Sure. So my journey really starts back in college. I actually went to school for finance. I was a business major, and my freshman year there was some sort of speaker series, and a venture capitalist and an entrepreneur came in and did this talk, and I had no idea that this world really existed at all. I grew up in like rural upstate New York. People hear New York and they think New York City, which is where I live now. Where I grew up, there were 20,000 people in our small town and probably more cows and horses than anything else. So I was in school in Boston, got exposed to venture, and I was going to a school that I wasn't in one of the top tier schools. So the way that I kind of worked my way into the industry was I would actually go to the MIT and Harvard job boards and look at stuff that was going on there and dress up in a suit and go and show up at like Harvard campus and try to network at these career events that they had. And I would always make a good impression because I'd be the only one in a suit there. And I was actually able to convince someone. So I went to Northeastern, which is actually a pretty good school now, but when I went, it was not the best. It's a solid investment on my part, accidentally. But they had this co-op program, and I convinced one of these VC firms to give me the opportunity to join them as a co-op. I was going to be in Boston. And then at the last minute, they said, hey, do you want to come out to San Francisco? I wound up doing 8 months at this VC fund out there. Fell in love with what I was doing. I was, bottom of the totem pole, but my job was to cold email people and get founders to hop on the phone or have coffee and let me pester them with questions. And most of them never wound up getting money from us. I was too junior for that, but I caught the bug, wound up going back and finishing up school, and then moving out to San Francisco and starting that role with them full time. And then from there, did 2 years associate track at this VC fund. And I don't know if you're too familiar with how the associate track typically works. Most people either go to business school or they go get operating experience. And for me, I was more the operating experience type. So App.io that you mentioned, I actually wasn't one of the original co-founders. When I joined them, I actually came on as their first non-technical hire, their first business hire. And I was playing this sort of pseudo biz dev product management type role. I really didn't know anything about product management at the time. And within a few months, it was clear that I probably should have done some more diligence on this company before I joined it. Financials were not in a good place. The product itself was pretty low engagement, pretty low retention, but there were some funky things happening with this sort of free version of the product that we had out. And this was really my first experience in product management, where I realized we were in mobile ad units at the time. The idea was that instead of watching a video of Angry Birds, which was popular back then, you'd be able to play Angry Birds. You'd start shooting these birds at pigs, and if you wanted to keep playing, then you would download the app. Netflix was still mailing DVDs. Streaming technology, bandwidth, like on cellular, was not there to support what we were building. But it was if you were doing it on a laptop. So we found out that there were a couple of call centers that were using us to do support for their mobile apps. And that's how I wound up realizing this opportunity for a pivoted the business. In the process, the board approached me, asked me to take over as CEO, asked me to step on as a co-founder, and the rest was history. That's how I sort of became an entrepreneur, became a PM, and started that entrepreneurial journey.
That's really exciting to know, Elliot. And just curious, you said that you were the first non-technical person in the startup, right? So what does it take to be the first non-technical person in a startup or an environment which is growing rapidly? Because I understand that if we are operating in a software business or in the tech business, most of the people in the early stage, they tend to have the technical grab or technical background so that they can envision the product and basically work in the development part, right? But it takes a lot to get in a business person or a non-technical person in an early stage. And maybe some insights there. What were your key roles? What skills particularly did they look for when they were looking for a non-tech person there?
So in this case, they were looking for someone that was doing like sales type BD work. And if I'm being honest, I don't even think like product management wasn't on my radar back then. It wasn't nearly as popular as it is today. And today, I think the route in is like this chief of staff type role has become a lot more popular. But whether it's chief of staff or it's what I was doing back at App.io, I I was young at the time. So if you're further along in in your career, it's probably not as relevant. But at that age, they were just looking for somebody that was like young and going to hustle their ass off and do whatever it took to figure it out. And in retrospect, it was this very like entry level PM type role where you just wore all the hats. But it was, I pitched them that like whatever needed to be done, I could do it. You need user research, you need data science, you need whatever, you need design work. I know my way enough around. It was Sketch at the time, not even Figma then. But that's how I got my foot in the door.
No, that's interesting, Elliot. In fact, just extending on what the question Rahul asked. So as like early stage PMs, me and Rahul were also pretty interested in exploring the startup ecosystem. But one pattern that we usually hear talking to founders, specifically founders in an early stage company having less than 10 or 15 folks, they mention that product manager as a hire comes usually very later in the ladder. You first hire software developers and mostly in the tech team, and the founders itself take the charge of whole product management journey. So what are your thoughts on it? Like currently you are leading general collaboration, and you must be a part of this startup ecosystem. So what's the trend right now? Do entrepreneurs usually hire product managers in the early stage of startup life cycle? And my follow-up question here is, being a product manager who wants to explore early stage startups, what is the right way to approach entrepreneurs and
Mm-hmm.
get a taste of entrepreneurship product management at these startups?
So this is obviously just one person's opinion, but for me at General Collaboration, I don't see myself hiring a PM in the near term. And if I were, I've done quite a bit of startup advising too, and I really wouldn't advise other startups to either. One of the founders needs to play that product management role up front. They need to have a strong opinion about where the product is going and really sweat the details in the way that a PM does. And if you don't have somebody on the founding team that can do that, you probably have bigger problems. It's hard to bring on someone that's going to care about your product and care about your business as much as you need that first PM type person to be. So it probably should be a founder. As far as getting your foot in the door, if you want to be that person, anyways, if you're an early in your career PM or product person and you're not ready to found your own thing, you want to go get experience, I would recommend that sort of chief of staff role. That's something that like I've been looking for. That's something I know other people have done. That I wouldn't call it product management because that would be overselling it. So what it's normally advertised as, the job spec will say chief of staff, or like biz dev is another one that you might see, especially like an enterprise SaaS company. But basically, like how I would define that role, what I would be looking for in that role is I want someone that's going to be my right-hand man. I want someone that's going to be like all the things that I have in my head that need to be done. Who can I trust to delegate these things to that is just as like gritty and tenacious and excited about the business as I am and is willing to roll up their sleeves and learn things. I think that like that first PM role for me, and really with the exception of being at like a big tech company, the PM role tends to be you're the person who wears all the hats that there aren't a person there to wear for you. Like that was thinking about my experience working at Facebook. That was the biggest rude awakening to me, was that all these things that I thought were being a product manager were actually entire people now. Like user research has always been a big part of what I've done as a PM. But when I got to Facebook, there was an entire, like there's a person on the team and they're the user researcher and there's a whole user research org and you have all these resources available. So if you want that PM-like experience early stage, I would say something similar to a chief of staff role, where what you're saying, what you're signaling to the founders of the company is, I want to learn. I love what you're working on. I'm willing to do anything. And it's,
Mhm.
you're willing to do user research. You're going to learn SQL and do the data work. You're going to take out the trash when it needs to be done. You're going to have that level of like grit
Mhm.
that an early stage PM would have, though it might not be called product management. Though you'll probably be in the pole
Yeah.
position to be that first PM when someone does need that title.
Mhm.
A quick
So,
follow-up question, Elliot. I think these insights are great. Following up with these roles, chief of staff or biz dev, definitely makes sense for someone who want to break into product management, but at such early stage companies. But what is the right way you think all these early stage product managers can reach out to entrepreneurs? Like as PMs, specifically international folks who are in the US searching for PM opportunities, one major challenge and hurdle is early stage startups don't usually post formalized job openings on the website or on Greenhouse, LinkedIn. So, what is the right way to reach out to the founders? What is the founder actually looking in the person whom they're interviewing? And how does the process overall looks like?
I think you'd be surprised the power of sending a cold email. And the value in that is that everyone's afraid to do it. And because everyone's afraid to do it, when you do, you stand out. I think the challenge is actually like for someone that's looking for that type of role, it's who do you reach out to? Because the few people that do send that cold email are all sending it to the same places. And if you're the one trying to you know, cold email Dylan Field at Figma, he's probably not going to respond, and he probably gets a truckload of those. But if you can figure out like, hey, this guy Elliott's doing something interesting, and I think what General Collaboration is doing is interesting, and it's like we're early stage. We're not we're not the most exciting place for you to work probably, but if you're a believer in what I'm doing, or you're a believer in what some other founder is doing, if someone like me gets that cold email, I'm going to at the very least take the call. So I think it's
Yeah.
the hard part is like getting out of your own way and sending the cold email, but probably more importantly, figuring out what do you think is interesting, what do you think is worth spending your time on.
Mhm. That makes sense. Would also love to know a bit more about this, Elliot. So now that you've been a founder multiple times, you have worked in the startup space, and you have also worked in Meta. If you have to highlight top two, three different modes of working or ways of working in these both environments, because they are very different in their nature. Like one is a very big giant, and other in the startup space, you basically take ownership for everything you do, right? So maybe if you can highlight a few pointers which can help people in their early stage or early in their career who are trying to evaluate whether startup or big corporates would be a good fit for them. If you can highlight something in those lines.
For sure. So, kind of picking up the story where I left off earlier. So, App.io wound up getting acquired, but overall, the lesson there was we had built we built really cool technology, and we were a cool technology in search of a problem. And we stumbled into that one that I pivoted us to, but it was kind of too little, too late. By the time that I took over that company, we were already running out of cash. So when I took over, the board charged me. My whole incentive model was tied to get this company acquired, and we were able to do that, and that was great. But what lessons I learned there, I took to founding my next startup. So I actually grabbed one of the engineers who we had hired on to help us orchestrate that pivot at App.io, and he and I founded Robin Health together. And like you said earlier, Robin Health was Uber for pharmacy. It was in that case, we did care about the problem. We started with this problem that we knew was real. My co-founder, William Newby, there was one night that he and I were we were in Salt Lake City on a sales call meeting with eBay, who has a big customer service team there. And while we're there, his daughter is home. It's like 3 a.m. and she's sick, and his wife is trying to figure out how to get the prescription that she needs from the pharmacy. And this was when like Uber was still new. And like Uber was just coming up on the scene. A lot of cities didn't have it. So this idea of Uber for X was kind of novel and pretty hot back then. And we came up with this idea for, what about Uber for pharmacy? I come from a family that has a pharmacy background. So in this case, unlike the first time at App.io, where it was technology in search of a problem, we started with a problem. But our mistake there, what we didn't realize, and I'll kick myself till the day I die over this, is that, so we were in San Francisco. We were an on-demand pharmacy app. And we wanted to focus on families. Like I said, we had this rooting in my co-founder, William, and the family needs that he had. And we were really frustrated because all we were delivering was a bunch of erectile dysfunction meds and hair loss medications. And we were like, what is this? Why is this going on? Now, for one, we were in San Francisco, which you two live in San Francisco. I spent 9 years living out in San Francisco. There aren't that many families in San Francisco. It's more of a city of like young people. And what we didn't pick up on was that people were embarrassed to go to the pharmacy and get these prescriptions. They wanted to get them at home. And the idea for Roe and Hims was right in front of my nose years before those businesses ever existed. And we were like, no, this is stupid. Get this out of here. We need the families. We need the Z-Packs for the kids. I don't want to deal with this stuff. And we didn't listen to what our users were telling us. So that company wound up shutting down, but learned a ton there. I was fortunate. One of our investors was NFX at Robin Health. And one of the partners who I got close with, his name's Stan Chudnovsky, he had actually left the partnership and joined Facebook full-time. And when I was doing the sort of apology tour, talking to my investors as we wound down Robin Health, he said, you know what, if you don't know what you want to do next, why don't you come to Facebook? You're going to love it here. It's a great environment. And he thought I'd make a good product manager. And like I said, at this point, I really didn't even know too much about product management. It wasn't like where today I feel like it's the hot job. Back then, it was pretty nascent, even to the degree that when I joined Facebook, Facebook had what was the last PM offsite, because there were so few of us that we could actually like go and have a singular offsite together where, I don't know, I'm going to forget the actual numbers here. By the time I left the company, it was like 80,000 people. When I joined, I think it was closer to like maybe 15,000 people. And there were maybe 200, 500 max PMs, where now there's thousands. I already mentioned that like the biggest learning from Facebook was this realization that all these things that I was doing as a founder that I thought of as doing product management were all these separate people that had their expertise, that were way better data scientists or user researchers or designers or whatever than I was ever going to be. So I really learned the skill, I guess, of product management, really graduated from execution to strategy there, which is probably one of the most important if we're thinking about a junior PM up-leveling to become more senior and to step into a management role. It's you start with that execution, and it's, you know, can you make sure that you're shipping on time? Can you make sure that people are building what they said they were going to build? To thinking more strategically, long-term vision. How does this fit into the larger whole? So did 5 years at Facebook and became Meta while I was there. I had some cool opportunities. When I first joined, I was working in ads, and that was because I struggled with user acquisition at Robin Health. And I said, where can I learn the most about acquiring users, but working on Facebook and Instagram ads? I was the PM for dynamic ads to start, learned a ton there about user acquisition, about how the company takes in all this data and the interesting ways that we were able to use it. And there were good things and bad things learned there. My fourth week was Cambridge Analytica, which was an interesting time to be working at the company for sure. But then I got that entrepreneurial itch again. Like I knew that I went into Meta or Facebook at the time thinking that this isn't not trying to build a career here. I know where my passion lies and I want to get back to it. And there was this cool opportunity at the time. Meta had started what was called Building 8. Building 8 was this skunkworks hardware lab inside of the company that it was basically, really summarizing it, that Facebook had really missed the boat on mobile. Apple owned mobile and the iPhone. Google had Android, and Facebook had tried. Facebook had a phone and it flopped terribly. And this was when like Internet of Things, connected home devices were coming onto the scene. And Facebook saw what was happening with Alexa and the Google Home Hub devices and said, not again, not this time. We, at the very least, need to have a horse in the race. Even if we're going to wind up playing on these other platforms, we need to have a horse in the race. So Building 8 was our attempt to have a horse in the race. And it was super cool. It was literally like the badge that I had got replaced by a special badge that got me into a special part of campus. We had this giant warehouse that inside of it, we literally had recreated multiple different homes, like entire houses with working kitchen appliances and bedrooms and all this stuff to play around with, like all these crazy ideas that we were dreaming up of what a Facebook powered connected home device might be. And eventually we went to market with what became Facebook Portal, this video calling appliance. And I was in this really great position where I happened to be there were 4 of us PMs. I was responsible for calling in collaboration, and the device that went to market was a calling appliance called Portal. Portal never did that well externally, but what was great for me, terrible overall in so many ways, but the pandemic hits and Facebook, like every other company, had no idea how to do remote work. When I joined the company, whether you were joining, I was just taking the shuttle down from San Francisco, but if you joined in our Australia office, you had to fly to Menlo Park to onboard as a new employee, and you got your laptop out of a
Yeah.
supply closet there. That couldn't happen anymore.
Yeah.
Portal became such an important part of how we were adapting to remote work that I got pulled into what we call the future of work, but really it was like, oh shit, how are we going to work from home? And I left the Portal org, started up this new future of work org, and got to start thinking through all these wild problems, like what were we going to use for virtual whiteboarding and how were we going to solve that onboarding problem? And just learned a ton of both product management, but got me back to that like 0 to 1 startup style thinking. And eventually came up with the idea for general collaboration, and that was enough to finally convince me, is this idea? I was always asking myself, I always had a bunch of ideas, always asking myself, is this worth quitting my job over? And I finally hit that threshold, and here we are.
That's great. Very inspiring, Elliot, actually. And I think you explained the whole journey so beautifully, like such great anecdotes learning about Facebook. And when we talk about Facebook, I know it's a great product company, but one thing that I'm unsure about is Facebook a top-down approach company or a bottom-up approach in which PM also has a key decision making in the overall vision and strategy of of the product or the company?
It's a little of both, and it varies by org, and it varies by. There were times that I was in orgs where it was peacetime. Like for example, in the time that I was in ads, there was times that it was peacetime, and you got to do bottoms up thinking, and we had a little more freedom to come up with interesting ideas. And there were other times where, like post Cambridge Analytica, that it was wartime, and leadership was coming a bit more tops down because they knew what the priorities were, and they needed to make sure that all those priorities were taken care of. Throughout the whole time that I was at Facebook, it kind of toggled back and forth from that. And over the course of my career there, this kind of comes back to, I mentioned that I wasn't trying to be a Facebook career guy. So I had this freedom where I actually went from individual contributor to manager to managing managers, back to individual contributor, back to manager. And I didn't care about jumping back and forth because I was just trying to learn as much as I could and work on the most interesting things and the most interesting people. So there were times that I was the top down. There were times that I was the bottoms up. There were times that I was on the bottom and getting told what to do top down and all those things. So
But
it's
which
a little
role
of
do
everything.
you like, Elliot? Like, do you like being an individual contributor or a manager?
There are things that I love about both. And
Okay.
there are definitely things that I love about both.
No, but
I
still,
think
if you
that
have to choose one, like if I ask you, like 10 years from now, you won't be able to switch sides. You can either be an IC or a manager. What would you pick?
I think my favorite is when I've had the opportunity to do this sort of like player coach role, which is really,
Okay.
I've had the chance to do that at Meta a few times. And really that's what being an early stage founder is, where I am managing the team and I have some of that responsibility, but I also get to get my hands dirty enough. There is, at a big company like Meta, there's this layer right above individual contributor and right below middle management where you get to have the best of both worlds. You get to have your cake and eat it too. And
Right. Yeah.
if I ever needed a role like that, that's probably what I'd go back to. But I guess if I'm going to give you a definitive answer, I like getting my hands dirty. If I had to truly choose one, I love doing the IC work. That's what got me back to wanting to found a company again, is wanting to think through the nitty gritty details and build it. But I guess it's IC, but bottoms up, or IC without any top.
Yeah, that's good to know, Elliot. And also because now that you have seen top down and bottom up both approach working in Meta, as GC is growing and as there'll be more and more people coming in, what do you think is the right approach for you for GC? Like, do you want it to be a top down or a bottoms up? Because in startup, I'm not sure how this will define the product roadmap or the product success, right? Because end of the day, it's a vision which the founders and the co-founders have seen, and now they're trying to pass it on to the team. So naturally, in the early phase, it'll be top to down. But as the team grows, do you think top to down approach helps you grow, or it hinders your growth, or how does that work out?
I think it's always about striking a balance. Like it's if vision and strategy are set clearly from the top down, then it really empowers the bottoms up to work. And there have been times at Meta, there have been times in my past startups where a lack of clarity on what the strategy was made it so that operating in a bottoms up way was near impossible. I remember feeling at times like it's like playing a game of Go Fish, and I'm like, what? I keep offering up these ideas, and you're not telling me which one you want. Like, what are the rules? What are the rules of engagement here? What is the strategy that I'm aiming to fit in? And it felt like this weird guessing game. Mm-hmm. I think that for GC to be successful, I think that for any startup to be successful, or maybe not successful, you can have a bad culture and make a great business. But the kind of business that I want to be a part of, the kind of business that I want to build, I hope that we can set clear enough strategies that a product team and every individual on it, be that the product manager, be that the most junior engineer that's on the team, all feel empowered of what they're doing at work, how their work levels up to this larger strategy. And I think if I'm thinking about like where that goes wrong, strategy is not goals. There's this great book called Good Strategy, Bad Strategy. And if you've never read it, it's by, his name's Richard Rumsfeld, I believe. He's a former UCLA business school professor. And this book is basically him just hitting you over the head with like, goals are not strategy. This is what strategy is. This is how you define a strategy for your team. Highly recommend reading it. One of the most impactful books that I've ever read.
Great. Elliot, I have one question.
Yeah.
It's a popular opinion. Entrepreneurs make great product managers. Firstly, do you agree that? Do entrepreneurs make great product managers?
Yes and no.
Okay.
My
So my second question was, absolutely. I think we are going in the perfect direction.
Okay.
I have personally talking to many folks at our Product Unfiltered podcast. Folks from specifically Google mentioned this, that Google pays a kind attention specifically on folks who come from an entrepreneurship background because according to them, they make great product managers. But I really want to explore the other side as well. What are some reasons why an entrepreneur should not become a product manager? You have been on the both sides. I think you can be the best person to share what are some reasons why you should get into product management if you're into entrepreneurship, and why not?
So reasons not to. I'll start there. That's a really interesting question, and you're right. I don't think I've ever been asked that before. I don't think I've ever heard anybody answer that before. When I joined Facebook and transitioned from entrepreneur to product manager, it was hard. And the first thing that was hard to me was I didn't know the language. And part of this could just be that like I hadn't worked in big tech before. Like I just said, with my career path, I started in venture capital, was part of a small startup where I was their first business hire and became a founder, then founded my next startup. And I hadn't worked on a team larger than 6 people. And then I went to one of the largest companies in the world. And the biggest disadvantage I felt that I had was I knew that I knew what I was doing, but I didn't know any of the language. I didn't know any of the jargon. One of the best decisions that I made at the time was there was a program. It was brand new then. It was called Reforge. And you've probably heard of it. It's a super cool program, and it's still around today. I joined it, and the whole time I was like, I already know this stuff, but I didn't know what to call these things. And because I just got away with we were kind of making it up as we went along at the startups. So I think one thing is realizing that there is, fitting in a large corporation, there is this sort of insider outsider mentality, and you need to conform to become a part of the larger corporate culture. I think the other thing that was really challenging was I'd really never had a boss before. And talk about bottoms up versus top down. Even at the lightest touch from the top down, I was used to having complete autonomy and being able to make decisions. And I think the phrase that I've best heard sum it up is that, I'm sure you've heard it too, leadership without authority is what product management is. So as an entrepreneur becoming a PM, my authority was all gone, and I had to learn entirely different tactics for how to lead. I will say, on the reverse side, it makes you a heck of a lot better leader when you go back to being an entrepreneur, when you can get people to do things because you're leading them rather than managing them to do it.
I have a quick follow-up question on the first point you mentioned. Like
Yeah.
coming from an entrepreneurial world into a very large organization, you need to speak the language being spoken internally, and that was something challenging to you. What, like from your experience, if there is a person X who has a very similar experience coming from a very small company or from a startup environment to a big tech, what are some ways in which the person can scale very quickly and can get into the shoes of a experienced product manager working in a big tech company?
Um, there's so many great resources now that were not available back when I was getting started in PM, where there were blogs and stuff back then. And I think today, I would say consider a program like Reforge. Like
Mhm.
it can be expensive. They've kind of pivoted, if I remember, where when I was doing it, it was for the individual. Now I think it is more like corporate
Corporate.
and more expensive for someone to do. So let's assume that is too expensive. I would jump into a community like Lenny's List. I get so much value still today from the content that's posted there. Um, but I think taking it a step further and like back to that example before of being willing to reach out to people cold and learn from people. Um, those people that are speaking on Lenny's podcast and that are writing articles there, those guests that are on your podcast, those guests that are on my podcast as well,
Mhm.
they're all just people. They're all just like us. And if you shoot them a cold message, they're going to be willing to hop on the phone, get a coffee, whatever. It's easier than you think to connect with the people that you admire, and I think there's so much that you can learn that way to scale yourself up.
Mhm. No, that makes sense. And that you mentioned about your podcast, Elliot, just curious there, since you've already been busy running your company, what motivated you to start your own podcast? Is it a way that it helps you increase your audience, or through your content you want to increase your channels to communicate to the audience, or is there what's the rationale behind having a podcast when you're already busy running a company?
Sure. So, just for a little context setting, so General Collaboration is my startup. And the gist of what we do at General Collaboration is we've built, I'll call it Superhuman for comments. We built this meta collaboration layer that sits on top of all the apps that we use at work. So think Google Docs and Figma and Notion and Linear or Jira and Airtable and all these apps that are all firing off notifications and that we're juggling all the content and comments inside. And it creates this singular inbox that aggregates those comments and makes it easier to see which ones need your attention and which ones don't, so you can prioritize where you spend time. We built it in a unique way where it's kind of like Grammarly-esque, where I didn't think the answer to like, I have too many apps. The answer is not, oh, here's another app. So instead we built it in this Grammarly style where it actually lives in all those apps that we're inside of. And based on all those apps, I'm sure you can imagine that our target user it's a product person. It's a product manager or a designer or a developer or a user researcher or just anybody that works on a product team.
Mm-hmm.
Minimum Viable Podcast, which is my podcast, is just an attempt to engage more with these sorts of people that are building interesting things in interesting ways. It's kind of rooted in user research, actually. One of my biggest learnings from my time at Facebook was user research was so important at App.io and at Robin Health. And I went to Facebook and I finally worked with someone who actually knew what they were doing in that regard.
Yeah.
And I learned so much. And user research has been a huge part of the general collaboration journey since day one. And realized over time that as I was doing all these user research calls and learning about foundational questions of like, how do you work? How does your team work? What tools do you use? Blah, blah, blah. That realized like, oh, this is interesting for me, but this is interesting in general. I'm not just learning how to better build this product for PMs. I'm also learning how to build product better. And what would it look like if I recorded that and shared that more broadly? So that's kind of where Minimum Viable Podcast started from, is just having a lot of really cool conversations and realizing I should be keeping that to myself. Mm-hmm. And the hope is, we attract builders like us, and that builders are interested in the tools that we're building because we're building it for them, and that we hear their feedback and we build it better for them. And we'll see. Just getting started with the podcast, so I'm excited to see where it goes.
Yeah, for sure. Because that's one of the learning which we also got, that through your content, you basically build the community, and your community nurtures and helps you grow your product, right? So that ideally, me and Utkarsh, we've seen that is a very good path, and that's how we invest a lot of efforts in Product Unfiltered and building the community around it. but that's there. So as we're moving ahead with the podcast and we are moving towards the end segment, before we do that, we have a very interesting round for you. We're going to
Sure.
have a rapid fire with you today. So the
And
rapid fire round.
I also want to share the insight behind this rapid fire round. A lot in our
Cool.
last episode, we had Cody Osman. He's the senior director of product at Pure Storage. And while we were talking to him, Cody mentioned the fact that when I interview product managers, there is one question that I always ask product managers. That is, I share them a product. It could be any product. And there are two phases of it. One is, if you like the product, would you buy it? If yes, what are the reasons? But also tell me why you would not buy that product.
Cool.
And that was quite powerful. Like that made me and Rahul thinking about the fact that we should also put our guest on the interviewing stage and ask them about their experience with multiple products. So that's the background I just wanted to put forward to the audience as well as to you. But yeah, Rahul, continue with
Yeah.
the section.
So in the rapid fire round, it's very simple. We want the answers to be quick. Whatever comes to topic from mind, please feel free to share those. We'll have 4 questions for you, and the first question is, what's your favorite product and why?
It's my favorite product. The one that immediately popped into my mind is, maybe it's not my favorite ever, but I've been loving this app called Kindred lately. Have you guys heard of Kindred?
Kintrin?
No.
Kindred, Kindred. Kindred is a home swapping app. And what you're able to do is it's like Airbnb-ish, but you're able to swap your home with someone else who also owns their home or rents their home. And it's there's no cost to it. It's
Wow.
like, I just did a 7-week trip to Madrid, and it cost us $230, and we stayed in this incredible person's home. And it's not a one-to-one home swap. They didn't come and stay at my house. I had credits from putting my place out for people to come stay. So like when I'm out of town for a wedding or whatever, people stay at our house, we get credits, and then we can go stay at someone else's house. I don't know if it's a venture backable business. I have no idea how they make money, because I only paid $230 and I went on vacation for 7 days. But their user experience is, they've built a community that makes me feel comfortable letting someone sleep in my bed in a really neat way. So I'm super impressed by it. That's my favorite product today.
Pretty interesting. I'm curious about the fact, like, if I want to be a part of this application, do I need to own the home, or is a rented home also works?
I think it varies by, it's one of those that's like Uber in the early days, where I think they would prefer for you to own, but I'm confident that a vast majority of people rent. But like here in New York, we've got pretty strict rules around Airbnb. It costs a fortune if you want to rent an Airbnb
Yeah.
here. I know if I wanted to Airbnb my place, I would have to rent it out for a full month, which is insane. But this isn't a rental; it's a home swap, so it completely skirts those regulations, which is neat.
No,
Great.
that's interesting. Yeah, Rahul,
And
let's move
the
forward.
second question in the rapid fire is, if you have to change one thing in the product management industry, what would that be?
I think I would change. I could change the interview, like the typical interview process. I still see so many people asking like how many golf balls you can fit on an airplane, and I hope that we grow out of that sometime soon, because that's not going to help figure out if someone's a good PM or not, and it's not going to get the entrepreneurial PMs. That's for sure.
But what's your favorite interview question, Elliot? Maybe we can include your interview question in our next podcast.
So I haven't hired for PMs at any of my startups. I've always played that role. But actually, I typically ask, similar to you, of like, what's a product that you're passionate about, and then ask how you would change it. And that, like, I think the key thing is, so many interviews are focused on the company, and they're asking, like, it's this sort of pop quiz where like you've never gotten to read the material, you've never gotten to work here before. So giving the candidate the opportunity to be the expert, kind of like you guys are doing now, of like, tell us something that you care about. I don't care if it's about a product or whatever. I've had interviews where people are telling me about their, I don't know, bottle cap collection or whatever, like random stuff, but something that you're passionate about that we're able to dive deep into really lets you see what someone's going to bring to the table, what passion they're going to bring to their role.
Yeah.
That makes sense. So your third question in the rapid fire is, what's your top productivity hack which you follow regularly?
Well, I mean, I guess I have to say that right now it's using channel collaboration. I quit my job at Meta because I felt like this needed to exist. So my top productivity hack is that I've got all these apps, and I want to use all these apps because every individual that I work with does their best work when they're empowered to work in whatever they do their best work in. And now I've got this singular hub where I'm able to easily navigate it and kind of see the forest through the trees, be able to see like how do all these documents, how do all these linear tickets and these Notion documents and Figma documents actually coexist together as a project. Outside of that, I think my biggest productivity hack is pen and paper. I'm the kind of guy that like, if it's not my notebook, it's not getting done. To each their own, but for me, it's my core list is pen and paper because I can't hide from it. I can't forget about it. I can't just like close the tab. It's always there with me. So that's probably been the most impactful for me.
I think the old conventional ways always works the best. But a bonus for our listeners, Elliott, is general collaboration tool open for personal use? Can our listeners go and try out the tool themselves?
Yeah. So actually, I think one of the things that I've struggled most with positioning this product is because of what we do. It's so often people think like, oh, this is for my team. It's like Slack, where like I can't use Slack by myself. I need all of us to use Slack together. And one thing that I need to solve, a big problem on my mind, is how can I better position GC so that people understand that it's actually initially for an individual. So for individuals, it's free, and our plan is for it always to be free. And you're able to sign in, sync the apps that you use at work, and it's going to give you these individual superpowers. And we hope that by you having these superpowers that, you're the PM on the team, and your designer one day says like, whoa, what is that? How did you do that? And it lands and expands teammate to teammate, team to team. But yeah, we're available for free for individuals. So definitely check it out. But if you've got any good ideas on how I can better position so that it's clear that it starts with individuals, let me know, because that's a product problem that we need help with.
Okay. Rahul, can I steal the fourth question? I had one question in mind which I wanted to ask to Elliott.
We can do them all. We can do both if you want to.
Okay, I'll go this time, and if surprisingly it's the same question what Rahul wanted to add, we can see if that works. But Elliott, like yesterday, me and Rahul went to this conference in the Bay Area from Snowflake. So Snowflake had their developer summit, and we were amazed to connect with many folks, both in the product industry. So one thing that we realized was that as a product manager, there are folks who are really passionate about product management, and there are folks who are passionate about the product or the industry they are working on. According to you, what makes a better product manager? A passion for PMing or a passion for that particular product or industry?
Oh, I don't think one is better than the other. I agree with you that there are both of those types of people, but I wouldn't say that one is better than the other. I'm definitely a generalist. Like, look at the things that I've worked on. Streaming tech, that was ad tech, that became customer service software, an on-demand pharmacy. While I was at Facebook, I worked on ads. I worked on a video calling hardware. And then I worked on this like future of work stuff. And then now I'm working in productivity collaboration tools. I'm a generalist, and I love being a generalist, and that's how I work best because I like the frameworks and I like the ability to work the problem more than anything else. But I think I mentioned earlier, my former co-founder at Robin Health, Kevin Holub, who is VP of product at Clover Health. And he is a phenomenal product manager, and man, does he love healthcare. And he knows the ins and outs of that industry like crazy. And I think especially if you're at something like the Snowflake conference, there's such domain expertise that's going to be so advantageous that if you're going to work on something like that, go deep. If you're going to work in health tech, go deep. Maybe fintech, go deep. These spaces, it's going to be hard to be a generalist. But it's not like one makes you a better PM versus the other.
But can you become a great PM without being passionate about that industry or product? Like, is passion a central skill that as a PM you need to be very passionate about the product or industry? Or is it fine, like, okay, I don't really resonate with the problems my product is solving, but still I can be a very good PM? Is that thing true in the product management domain from your experience?
That's a great question. I think that passion plays a role only in that, back to that point of leadership without authority, that if you're going to be able to, if we really boil it down, the product manager is like the only person on the product team that doesn't have any like black and white skills. Like, designers know how to design, and engineers know how to develop code, and a user researcher knows how to do that, and a data scientist knows how to analyze the data, and a product manager doesn't actually have an output, doesn't have a deliverable. Their role is to bring the best work out of all these other people. And unless you're passionate about the actual management tactics and how you support the team, which is that generalist approach for the most part, or you're so passionate about the problem and you're into the nitty gritty details of like, who is our user and what do I care about them? What is important to them? If you don't have one of those passions, we'll call them, you're gonna have a rough time. You're gonna be bored. You're gonna become bored relatively quickly. So I think that it doesn't matter which way you're passionate, whether it's generalist or it's being a domain expert, but it's hard to do this job if you don't give a shit. You really need to give a shit.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Perfect. Thank you so much, Elliott. Leaving it to Rahul. Rahul, was I spot on with the question or?
Yeah, I mean, we always cover what we want to, so that's good. But before we end the podcast, Elliott, I just want to, maybe it was just a part of the rapid fire of you, or if you want to elaborate more, you can go so. What's the one piece of advice which you have received in your career, which is always stick to you and you want to pass it on to our audience as well? Because a lot of people in our audience is early career product managers or people who are evaluating if product would be the right space for them or not. So irrespective of they being exploring product, what would be a piece of advice which you want to share with them?
That's a great question. If I'm thinking back to like advice that would have been impactful to me early in my career, it would be to find the fastest moving water that I could. And it's easy to get stuck in the world of product. It's easy to get so laser focused in on what it is that you're working on, the people that you're working on it with. And there have definitely been times in my career where I felt like I was so focused on one thing right in front of me that I didn't look up and look around to see what other opportunities were around me. And realize that like, oh, there's this other thing that if I wouldn't have worked on that, I would learn so much more and it could set me on this different trajectory. So I think always asking yourself, like, what is the most impactful thing that I can be working on right now, whether it's in your own role or if it's looking at other roles. You don't want to jump around too much. I'm definitely not advocating for that. You're not going to have a good time if your resume is a bunch of, 6-month stints at different companies. But being really thoughtful about, don't just think about the next job. Don't just think about the next project. Think about the long-term roadmap of what you're building. Think about the long-term roadmap of your career is probably advice that I wish I'd gotten when I was a little bit younger and earlier in my career.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that advice, Elliott. I'm 100% sure it's going to help a lot of audience because in early in your career, you need these words of wisdom because people like you who have been there in the industry have tried different things out. If you share your experience, that definitely adds a lot of value. But this officially brings us to the end of today's podcast. Thank you so much, Elliott, for joining us and sharing all those kind words with us. Hope our listeners have learned something new with our discussion today and stay tuned for more such exciting episodes. Thank you so much for tuning into Product Unfiltered.
Thanks for having me, guys. This was fun.